Welcome to Mishna study Masachet Maasrot, Perek Aleph Mishna Zayin. Over here, we're going to continue in the process, the Gemar Melacha. What is the final, right, production stage of certain fruits, right? So we spoke about different fruits in the last Mishnah. Now we're going to move on to speak about wine and oil. That's going to be the stage that wine and oil are obligated in Maasrot. When is that final production stage? So Hayayin, Mishi Kaper, wine. Once you, and according to Harambam, you skim off, right, the top, sorry, not when you skim off, that's Bartunura explains like you skim off. Over here, Harambam says it's when the it starts to foam, right? That wine starts to foam on top. You didn't necessarily have to skim it off, but then wine needs to foam on top. Once it starts to foam on top, that's its final stage. That's when it's considered wine. Now, right? Let's, even though it actually did start to foam on top, you could still take from the upper wine press. Now, what is this? I just took a picture over here, right? You see the wine press over here in the the upper left-hand side, the more that area where you could step into. They would, the higher one, they would go in there, they would put the grapes in there, they would step on them, and then you'd see it would come out through this little, almost like a, tzinor, little type of pipe into this lower, the gata tachtona. So the gata aliona is where you press, the gata tachtona is where is the board, is basically where all the wine gathered into. So now we're saying over here that even though, right, it started to kafa, right, it started to I guess like foam on top, you still let it take from the upper vat, right, where you would step on the grapes. Uminat sinor, or from that, the pipe in between, or anywhere, and you could drink. Right. The point over here is it didn't go down to the lower, the board, the lower press, the lower part of the press. At that point, it's considered its final stage. Hashemin, now when it comes to the oil, mishired la uka, right? Once it goes into the uka is the lower part after you press the oil. It's where the oil gathers into, right? It's a little bit of a ditch, right, where the oil will gather into. So that's over here. Actually, pull this picture. It's from Tel Hatzor, right up in the north, really one of the oldest Kanaani, cities. Pre-Yehoshua times, and you could go there and actually see this wine press, oil press over there today. And you see over here what they would do is they would take the olives, right? First they would crush the olives. They would crush them with something called a mimal, right? I was going to mention the Mishnah, that's why I'm just introducing it over here. They would crush those olives, then they would take them and put them into these baskets over here, right? These baskets are called an akal, right? You put this into the akal, these baskets, and they would go ahead and put this stone on top, a beam, and they would attach to that beam going across, they would attach another stone to give it weight, and it would go ahead and squeeze all the oil out of the olives. When it squeezed it out, it would seep through the baskets into the uka, right? Into this uka is on the bottom, right? This little ditch that you see along underneath the baskets, and there the oil will gather, and then a person will also put a cup, a jar, a jug underneath and catch whatever drips out. Right? So that's how the oil process works. So over here, what we're discussing in our Mishnah is the shemen, right? What's the final production stage of the oil? So when it gets into that uka is that ditch on the bottom. Right? Even though it already went down, right? It already started to go down. You still got to grab a little oil from the baskets, right? That's considered a temporary eating, a temporary drinking. It's not its final production stage. Umin hamimal, right? Hamamal, right? Or from the mamal, we explain that as that's what they would use to crush the olives. Umin berapasim. Berapasim is in between the stones that they would lay, or the pieces of wood that they would lay in this betabad. Minotela hamita. You're allowed to go ahead and place these into the hamita and tamhui. These are two different really serving dishes. You take hot food and you put them into these serving dishes. But you can't go ahead and put this oil into a kedera. You can't go ahead and put it into a pot. You can't put it into a kli rishon. You can't put it into something that's really you usually use to cook, because at that point, we're not going to consider it a temporary eating anymore. Right? Someone will have a little bit something to taste, right? But once they start cooking it, that's already a sense of permanence. And once you cook it, that's going to be its final production stage from Maasrot, right? So basically for the wine, we're saying it's when it starts to, foam on top, right? Or it reaches the board, the pit, right? That's where you're gathering it from. Oil is when we said either one or two things, either when it reaches also the uka, which is the ditch, or when you start to cook it, right? Once you start to cook it, that's also its final production stage. Rabbi Yehuda argues in Tanakh. He says, you like to put it into anything except for something that has vinegar or tzir, a fish brine, because these two things, right? You even put it into a kli rishon. You could put it into the pot itself, right? What's his point? That these two things, vinegar and fish brine, they cause the oil to really cook, much quicker. Because of the harifut, because of the poignancy of the actual dish itself, but halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda.